Hello, good afternoon again to our friends from the media. We are going to have our second round of press conference for today. For this round of press conference, we have another special guest speaker. He is Dr. Julius Parreñas. He is the coordinator of the Asia-Pacific Infrastructure Partnership and Asia-Pacific Financial Forum. And in this afternoon's session, discussions focused on proposals on how to develop capital markets across Asia-Pacific. Of course, the discussions are anchored on the idea that if we are able to develop our capital markets, we will have more funds and resources for financing infrastructure development initiatives. So to give highlights of discussions this afternoon, may I call on our speaker to give a brief opening statement before we open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. As you know, we're holding a workshop here in Iloilo. And the purpose of this workshop is to provide inputs to what the finance ministers this year, the APEC finance ministers, will launch, which is going to be called the Cebu Action Plan, and that's because they're going to hold their meeting in September in Cebu. The Cebu Action Plan contains many issues, but our workshop focuses on infrastructure and capital markets. I have, the last time I was here in Iloilo was 15 years ago. And when they told me that this workshop was going to be held in Iloilo, I was surprised because my memory of Iloilo was it was more or less a sleepy little town. But when I arrived, I was quite shocked and amazed at how much construction, how much economic activity, and especially infrastructure has been put in place. And so I understand why this workshop is being held here, because it really provides a very good backdrop to our discussions. Well, as you know, development brings problems with them. And one of the major symptoms of an economy that is growing is you have a lot of traffic, you have a lot of congestion, not just in roads, but the ports, airports, and many other things. Energy, you will have water, and all of these things. You have all of these problems. And you have these problems because in some cases the infrastructure development cannot cope with the development of the economy. And that's why, not just in Iloilo, but in many other cities in Asia, if you go to Indonesia, for example, or Vietnam, you also see a lot of places experiencing the same kind of things that you see here in Iloilo. Urbanization, a lot of economic activities, and the need for more infrastructure. According to ADB, for the next 10 years, Asia will need about $8 trillion for infrastructure. So it seems from the point of view of many policymakers, it seems that it's very difficult to find funding for infrastructure. Probably not so much in the Philippines. It seems that our financial institutions are quite liquid, so there's a lot of funding. But that is not the case with many Asian countries. Like Indonesia, for example, they have a lot of problems getting funding from infrastructure because their banks, for example, cannot lend beyond 7 years. So they have very short-term lending capabilities. So the question is there no funding for infrastructure? Actually, that is not the case. As we discussed in our workshop, there's actually about this was as of end of 2013, the OECD made a study which showed that there's about $97 trillion of money in institutional investors that are looking for places to invest. So you have actually a lot of money going around in this world, and they're looking for investments. A lot of this money in pension funds and insurance companies, for example, are invested in government bonds. But there's in places, for example, like Japan or the U.S. or even Europe, there is a low interest rate environment, and so they actually have a lot of problems, getting the kind of yield that they want to have for their investments. So they're looking for assets which could yield higher, and of course, infrastructure is perfect for these types of assets because pension funds, insurance companies, they have long-term horizons. The kind of money that is in these institutions are long-term liabilities, and infrastructure are long-term assets. So it's really a perfect match. And the question is, why isn't this money, this long-term money in pension funds and insurance companies not flowing into infrastructure? There are a number of problems. One problem is while there is a lot of need for infrastructure, there are really very few bankable infrastructure projects that are available for them to invest in. There are many infrastructure projects being offered, but a lot of these are not cannot be considered bankable, and that is because in many developing countries where governments still do not understand very well, what are the needs of the private sector, what are the requirements they have for investing in infrastructure. The normal thing for central, local governments to do is to develop projects and push all the risk to the private sector. Let the private sector take most of the risks. And if that is the case, then that project is not bankable. It's not attractive for private sector to invest in. In APEC, we are doing a lot of things to help governments understand how to develop bankable infrastructure projects. And there is a lot of interest on the part of governments. And the way that we have done this in APEC is to gather together knowledgeable people within the government who understands these things and establish PPP centers, which can serve as knowledge disseminators within the government structure in order to make people within the government, the line agencies, for example, who develop the projects, local governments, to understand how best to structure projects so that it's attractive for the private sector. So we have already, that in the Philippines we have a PPP center. So in Indonesia, they established also a PPP center the other year, and in China they established a PPP center last year. There's already PPP centers existing in Malaysia, in Taiwan, and Korea. So what we're doing in APEC is to bring all of these PPP centers into a network and use that network for them to share experiences. What is the best way to structure projects to make it more attractive to the private sector? Of course, you need a lot of capacity building assistance, technical advice, and the strength of the finance minister's process in APEC is that aside from the 21 finance ministries, you also have all the multilateral development banks involved, the ADB, World Bank, OECD, IFC, IDB. And these are the institutions that have the technical capacity to provide advice to governments and officials. And of course, in the private, which I represent in APEC, we have a very strong presence in APEC. So we have, for example, about 70 practitioners. These are senior executives from companies that are investing in infrastructure or are involved, for example, in companies that provide rating services, that develop projects from all over the region. And these people are also available to provide advice to government governments, telling them from the investor point of view, what's do you still need to do to structure this project to make it attractive for us to come in. So that is one part, one problem and one solution that we are developing. How to help governments develop bankable projects. Now the other problem is that for many insurance companies or many pension funds, they do not have the capability, for example, to manage infrastructure assets, because you need very specialized skills in order to do that. And so there are some of them who have developed specialized infrastructure teams, but these are mostly the large insurance companies and large pension funds. For example, MetLife in the U.S., they have a dedicated team focusing on infrastructure investment. In Canada, you have the Canadian Pension Investment Board. They also have a dedicated team. But in many other pension funds and insurance companies, they don't have that capability. So one of the ways by which pension funds and insurance companies put their money into infrastructure is through capital markets. And that is why we are discussing how do you develop capital markets. For example, in Chile, they have a lot of investments from Canadian pension funds. But this goes through capital markets when Chilean company that is or Chilean government having a project issues bonds, and then those bonds are bought by insurance companies as investment products. The problem in many Asian countries, the capital market is not very well developed. And so that's why one of the issues that we are dealing with is what are the things we need to do in order to develop capital markets. Now, there is another way because it is not only through capital markets that insurance companies and pension funds can invest in infrastructure. They can also do that, for example, through private funds investing in making equity investments in infrastructure. And the Philippines actually has pioneered a very good example of this, which is called the Philippine Investment Alliance for Infrastructure. This is a project where GSIS partnered with a Dutch pension fund called APG. This was catalyzed by the Asian Development Bank, and the fund is being managed by an Australian investment bank called Macquarie. So this is partnership that involves local institution partnering with a foreign institution and a multilateral institution, and with an investment bank that has expertise in infrastructure investment managing their investments. And of course, Macquarie is the largest owner of toll roads in the world, so it's really a company that brings experience to the market. So this is another way by creating structures like this, private funds, equity funds, but not just equity funds, also debt instruments, infrastructure bonds, for example. So the question is, of course, how can we develop how can we bring the expertise to help governments develop these financial instruments, develop capital markets. And what we have been discussing in the finance minister's process is we bring together the expertise of governments and agencies that are supporting them. For example, in Japan, you have the Japanese Ministry of Finance participating in the process, but they also have agencies like JICA or JBIC, for example, who can provide technical assistance. And you have similar arrangements in Australia in the US and other countries. And to bring the private sector into the discussion, and this is the job that we're doing. So this is the kind of arrangements that we are developing, and which we are going to propose to ministers to include in the Cebu Action Plan, and that hopefully through very concrete activities like workshops, dialogues with governments, we will be able to improve the situation, to help governments develop gradually their capital markets, develop instruments that will help long-term investors put their money in infrastructure, and also help governments structure projects that are attractive for the private sector. So let me end with that, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
Okay, we are opening the floor to questions. Again, for our friends from the media who would like to ask questions, you may approach the mic, state your name and your organization before you ask the question. So who wants to ask the first question, ma'am?
Good evening. I am Runji Hamolo of Radyo ng Bayan. How much of this available fund is accessed by the Philippines? Or the question is, how should the Philippines position itself to get access to this fund?
Okay. Well, I cannot answer the first question because we really don't have much of the statistics. I mean, these are a lot of these are private information, with the financial institutions. But I can answer the second question. How do you access these funds? Are you talking of the total amount of funds all over the world? $97 trillion. Yes. Well, the first thing we are actually, or the Philippine government is trying to do, which is really to get the line agencies who are launching the PPP projects and the local governments together in order to launch, to bring to the market better projects. That is not easy because, first of all, you need coordination among different departments. It's not easy in any country in the world because normally governments work in silos, right? I mean, you have the finance Department of Finance, you have Department of Commerce, you have all sorts of other public works, Department of Transport. All of these are line agencies that are responsible for bringing infrastructure projects to the market. So, challenge I think has been partly addressed, and the key institution really here is the PPP Center, which is under NEDA, because this is the coordinating body for PPP. And what they did was to establish a structure on top of the PPP Center where you have all the undersecretaries of these line agencies represented. So I think that's a good first step. And then the next step is to use the available technical assistance that, for example, the multilateral agencies are making available, like Asian Development Bank, World Bank. So they have the technical resources to help, provide workshops for officials so that they have a better understanding of how they can structure infrastructure projects. The third is really to go deep, and that is to involve the local governments, because local governments are also, in the process of developing infrastructure projects. So you need to bring in the local governments into this process in order to let the capacity, the knowledge trickle down to the officials at this level who are also involved in bringing infrastructure projects to the market. So I think that's the important point that needs to be done. But that's one part of the equation. The other thing is we need to develop the local bond market, the Philippine peso bond market, because infrastructure, the revenues are in local currency, and so for foreign companies, it's very difficult for them to in foreign currency, but then it's because of the currency risks. It's very difficult for them to do that. But if you have a local currency bond market, then they can actually raise the financing from here and invest that in infrastructure. So they bring in their money, and then they make some arrangements, for example, swaps and all of these things, and then the amount that can be raised can be invested in infrastructure. So there's no currency mismatch. The problem is there are technical details that needed to be to be addressed to make our our Philippine peso bond market more able to do that. And one of the most important issues there is liquidity of the bond market. Basically, liquidity means because there are many buyers and sellers in the market, so whenever you want to sell a bond, somebody can buy it. Whenever you want to buy a bond, somebody's there to sell it. But the thing is, there are not enough buyers and sellers in the market. So you need more diverse investors, more diverse issuers, and the kind of financial instruments that will allow investors, for example, to hedge the risks. So you need, for example, repo market, you need derivatives market to develop. So there are some legal, technical issues why that make it a bit difficult to develop that, but that is exactly what we need to address. And so, for example, ADB, ISDA, which is the International Securities Dealers, Securities and Derivatives Association, are advising and bringing together the players, like Banco Central, the SEC, of course, PDEX, and all of these players, in order to agree on the kinds of legal reforms that are needed in order to make the repo markets and derivatives markets work.
Okay, who wants to ask the next question? Okay, ma'am. Please state your name and your organization.
Good evening, Lilibeth French of the Philippine Information Agency. Sir, in the Philippines, liquidity is high, not only in Metro Manila, but even outside. Iloilo City, for instance, has 60 billion pesos savings deposits. So how do we mobilize these resources outside Metro Manila to benefit local and national economies more?
Well, actually, you touched on something which is really an advantage for the Philippines, and I don't think you need to do much more because we have, as you've said, many of the institutions in the Philippines are very liquid. So not only the banks, but you also have the big companies like SM Ayala, for example, which have a lot of money to put into infrastructure. So they are putting their money across the Philippines. Now, outside of the major growth centers in the Philippines, of course, it would be good if there would be more investment in infrastructure in order to really have an even economic development throughout the country. But these are really the jobs of local governments. The reason I think, well, I'm not sure because I haven't been here for a long time, but what people are saying, the reason that Iloilo has really attracted a lot of investment in infrastructure is because of the governance. That is really the key. If you have a local government that has good governance and puts the right policies in place that makes it business friendly, investor friendly, then the investments in infrastructure will come.
Any more questions? Okay.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. I'm Bomboayan Kahita, Bombo Radyo, Iloilo. In Iloilo, there's what we call an investment failure. Like, I want to go specific. The housing project in Pavia, Iloilo. I think more than 100 millions of pesos, the money of the people was wasted. So for our future infrastructure projects, how do we help or how can we avoid this investment failure or these things to happen again?
Yeah. That is that happens, in many places, even in developed markets like Australia, for example. Um, and normally the cause of failure is the failure at the start of designing the project. Infrastructure, it's like planting a tree or planting a seed that becomes a tree. If you plant the seed in the wrong place, then the tree will not grow. It will grow and it will be stunted. So that's why we have always stressed the importance of planning, because infrastructure is a very complex thing. If you build, for example, a road, then you have to think of whether you will have enough passengers, 10 years from now, in order to get the returns that you need for that road. You also need to think of whether the politicians will put up another road, another toll road that will compete with the road that you're putting. Or are there plans for a railway, for example, that will also compete with that infrastructure? So very clear planning, long-term planning is very important in order for infrastructure projects to be viable. The other thing is, of course, also on the part of the proponents and designers of the infrastructure projects, is that they have to have due diligence in designing that project. They have to, for example, take into consideration, the revenues that will come, and they have to take into consideration, various unexpected developments that could, for example, delay the construction project, increase the cost, for example. So you need the skills to design projects in that way, because if the infrastructure project gets delayed, if it's PPP, eventually what happens is that the government has to take over the extra costs, and that is going to go to the taxpayers, right? And that is what happens when an infrastructure project fails, and it becomes very unpopular, because then the people feel that they've paid more for the infrastructure than what was originally told to them. So it's important to have good planning at the start, and it's important for the project design to be robust. As I've said, this is not a problem that is specific to developing countries like the Philippines. Even developed countries, they make these mistakes too.
I have one additional question, sir. With regards to like Pavi Housing Project is a project that was not completed, but we have infrastructure projects, for example, here in Iloilo, like the flyover. People would claim more that the flyover is not serving its purpose. Some say that instead of it instead of making the traffic or decrease the traffic problem, it has worsened the situation. So what can we do about this?
Okay. I think that that is an issue where the community was not actually consulted in making the project. This is also a very important part of what I was saying, that project preparation has to include consultation with the stakeholders. Transparency, in the sense that, it's not a project that, somebody's trying to push because he has, some, friends who will profit from, being the contractors of this project. But it has to be transparent, and there has to be consultation. And this is, I think that particular issue, the flyover, is not as sensitive as, for example, projects that affect environment. So especially for these types of projects, in order for the infrastructure project to succeed, it has to be supported politically by the community, because otherwise you'll have these types of problems that you just mentioned.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Okay, please.
Good evening. I'm Glenda Salogastoa from Panay News. Sir, our government has several billions of unspent fund for the projects. So how can the private sector tap to these unused funds for like infrastructure projects? And follow-up question, sir, what would be the best mode of PPP? Because as we understand, there are several kinds of PPP scheme.
Yeah. Well, I cannot answer your first question because I haven't been reading the news since I live in Japan. So, and I'm not familiar with what's the cause behind the government having these things. I would guess that especially at the beginning when President Aquino promised that he will launch a number of projects, and I remember that a few years ago we had a dialogue with the cabinet, and the issue there was it took them time to prepare the project. So the money was there, but it was not being spent because the projects were not ready to be put out to the market. But it was explained to us at that time by Secretary Purisima that they had to take some time because they had to be very careful to make sure that the first projects that they would launch should be successful. Because if they were to fail, then there will be a lot of criticisms on the PPP scheme that the president was pushing. And if that becomes unpopular and attracts a lot of criticism, especially from the politicians in Congress, and that would kill PPP for the next 20 years. And so they had to be very careful to make sure that the projects come out right, and so there was a delay. Now regarding the different types of PPP projects. Well, this is something that is really on a sector by sector basis, because even different sectors have different characteristics of PPPs, because you have different risks that are involved. For example, when it comes to roads, you have ridership risk, which is basically the risk that you overestimate the traffic that will come and the revenues that come with it. So you spend a lot on the project, but then you don't really get the returns when they come. But these types of risks don't exist, for example, in the case of water utilities or electricity. Then you have different other risks. And so that's why the characteristics of PPP changes also with the sector. So it's really, but the thing is, you have already a lot of experiences on PPP all over the world, and so that's why we are promoting the APEC as a platform for sharing of experiences of these PPPs in these sectors. How do you deal what types of PPPs are appropriate for this particular sector, for this particular level of development.
Okay, we can accommodate perhaps one or two more questions. Yes.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Parreñas. I am Ben Devera of Philippine Daily Inquirer. Sir, do you have any policy or perhaps regulatory recommendations that can be adopted by the governments belonging to the member economies so that they can develop the capital markets and enjoy more participation of pension funds and also insurance companies, so that we can better allocate perhaps the risks between not just so that the private sector will not shoulder all the risks, and also the government perhaps can take some part in reducing.
The first part of your question, could you repeat it? The
Uh,
regulatory.
Yeah, do you have any regulatory or policy recommendations that can help develop capital markets?
Okay. Well, one issue that, for example, we're talking with SEC and other institutions is the development of classic repo markets. I understand that there are still some misunderstandings about, like for example, the use of the of internationally accepted types of repos, because I understand that the local institutions are trying to develop their own repos, because there's a misunderstanding that use of repos is like money creation. So BSP, for example, has some reservations about it. But I think a lot of these things can be cleared up by discussion if we bring in, especially those people from the capital markets in other parts of the world, to make the regulators understand better, what are the implications. So that is one important thing, is the introduction of classic repo markets in the Philippines. The other thing is with respect to promoting the availability of information to capital market investors. There's a lot of interest in SEC in this. The thing is, the governments, they provide a lot of information, but the private sector don't need all of these information, and the private sector investors need some information that are not available. So there are basically three areas where investors would like to have more information in order to have confidence when they invest in capital markets. So the first is information about the issuer, and this is really disclosure. And I think that there are not so much problems, so there are still some types of information that could be provided more. The second is bond market data, which is really, to help investors monitor what is happening to their investment in the course of time. And the third type of information that investors need is what are the rights of investors when the issuer becomes insolvent. So this is really addressing the information needs at various stages of an investment. When you want to invest, so information about the issuer during the life of your investment, data about how your investment is progressing, and at the exit, when you have to exit because if the issuer becomes insolvent, do you really get most of what you've invested, or do you get anything at all? So the clarity of the laws, the clarity of information that is made available. So that's SEC is very interested in that because they want to know what actually are the needs of investors, so that they can reallocate resources from those providing those information that investors don't really need to providing the information that investors need. So these are, some of the issues that we're discussing.
Sir, very quickly, your recommendations on the repo and also more access to information. Do you think APEC governments would be open to adopting them?
Yes, yes. We actually, in the private sector, we have developed the templates already for these 3 types of information. And we have submitted them to the finance ministers last year. And the finance ministers have practically said, this is very good. So now the question is, how do we operationalize this thing? And basically it means going from country to country, bringing in the people from, the private sector, credit rating agencies, investors, to have a dialogue with, the officials in each country, who are responsible for making this information available.
Very last one. Can this be done in the near term? Or
Sorry?
can this be done in the near term, in the next?
Yes, yes, because this is quite straightforward. It's not a complicated thing.
Okay, we can accommodate one last question from the floor. Yes.
Again, I am Runji Hamol of Radyo ng Bayan. People, sir, demand from government quality infrastructure services, and yet quite adamant or hesitant about shouldering some toll fees or higher transportation costs. In a country like the Philippines, is it possible to demand all this and yet not shouldering the costs for this?
Yes, that is, that is an issue that is probably worse in some other countries than in the Philippines. For example, in Indonesia, it's worse. And that is because the government has been subsidizing these things for many years. So people are used to, practically paying very low, fees for utilities. This is what you call the economics behind the infrastructure. And that is difficult because that means that, in order to attract private sector to go into these projects, then the government must shoulder, more of the costs. So that, in the form, for example, of guarantees or in the form of including in the budget. So the government portion in the PPP will be higher. Although, it's actually the same, although the distribution may be different, but that will go back to the people in the form of higher taxes. So, people will not be paying much for the infrastructure, but then they'll be paying more. I mean, they need to pay more taxes for that. So, but that's probably easier to do because it's less visible to people. So, people are not as resistant to this kind of thing because they don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, its taxes are less visible than, when actually you have to pay more for, road tolls and that kind of thing. Now, I think eventually it's an educational matter, and also it's part of the development, because as countries develop and people become more prosperous, then they become more willing to pay more for services. I mean, that is normal. You see it all over the world when countries develop, like Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, Japan. At the beginning they don't pay much, but they're more willing to pay as the country develops. And so you can always find a way to finance that PPP. But that just means that, public money has to be a bigger part of the package when the market is still developing.
Okay, we are about to bring this press conference to a close. Dr. Parreñas, for your closing statement, perhaps you can share more of your views on the Philippines, your outlook on the Philippines PPP program. You mentioned about the huge global institutional investment funds available out there, with the significant efforts of the Philippines to push its own PPP agenda. What do you think are the country's chances of cornering more foreign investments with the right promotion?
Okay. Well, I'm looking at the Philippines right now. from the perspective of Japanese companies, because I work for a Japanese company, which is the largest investment bank in Japan, Nomura. And what I can say is that a lot of Japanese companies are very, very interested in the Philippines, especially during the past few years. Perhaps part of that is due to, the global developments. The price of oil has gone down, so it's bad for, our neighbors like Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, who are exporting oil, and good for the Philippines because, we're oil importers. So in terms of relative performance, we're, doing better than our neighbors. Also, the slowdown in exports, for example, which has hurt other countries in Asia like Singapore, which are, Malaysia, Thailand, which are, very strong on exports. In the case of the Philippines, exports are less important to us because a bigger part of our economy comes from domestic consumption. Again, that puts the Philippines at a relative advantage vis-a-vis our neighbors, and so we look better than them. But I think a big part of that is also because of the ability of the Aquino administration to really introduce the right policies that investors want to see, to focus on things that investors, foreign investors like infrastructure PPP. This has sent a very strong signal to investors all over the world, that the Philippines is something that they should look at more seriously. So in the case of our company, for example, after the Lehman crisis, we had to reduce our presence in Asia, but most especially in Asia. But now that we're looking at these developments with China, for example, slowing down, and Southeast Asia, becoming more more interesting, and especially the Philippines, then we are starting to look at expanding the operations in the Philippines and expanding operations in in areas like infrastructure, for example. Although we still don't know how we're going to do it, because there are many ways of putting being involved in infrastructure investment. But definitely it's an area that now many Japanese companies are looking at.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Parreñas, and thank you very much to our friends from the media for your active participation. This ends our press conference for today. I will see you all again tomorrow around noontime for our last press conference. Thank you.